G'day guys. I came across a study that actually is looking at some of the related issues with the current COVID sort of pandemic related issues. So I thought I may share this information with you. I'm not going to go through the whole study. I'm just going to take a look at a few things. People have been talking to me and interacting with me and saying, Harry, I've been feeling this and feeling that and whatever else. So this is an incomplete, they're saying it is an incomplete systemic recovery, metabolic pheno revision in post-acute phase, non-hospitalized C19 patients, implications for assessment of post-acute C19 syndrome. So what we call the long COVID type things and stuff like that. So they do identify certain biomarkers that are slightly elevated or change several parameters. Persistently protruded elevated taurine versus the control, reduced glutamine to glutamate ratio, indicative of possible liver and muscle damage, and a high energy demand linked to more generalized tissue repair or immune function. Some of the parameters show near complete normalization. So blah, blah, blah. And they've got all these figures and they've got some of the information. I was looking at these sort of things that were really interesting. I'll go first here, like fatigue, sort of coming down, seems to be one of the high ones that people get. And even here, it's sort of, look, you're getting from baseline, you're getting up to 78.6%, and then it's coming down to only 50%. So you've still got, systemic, like follow-up, like sort of one of these long COVID sort of effects seems to be this one. Cough, and I've sort of, that's also seen with people taking the jab of the heart, the mRNA types. I've seen a number of people having these persistent coughs that just won't go away. They probably have slightly less poor immune system, so they can't clear the damn stuff out of their system. So it persists for longer in their lungs and stuff like that, creating this constant effect. So, and some of the damage that actually will incur. So it's quite interesting because still, if people have got a poor immune system, poorly regulated immune system due to lower vitamin D status, they will sustain some damage even from the so-called protection when they do get the jab and their immune system overbehaves and does a bit more cellular damage in the lungs. So that's another sort of things. Ammonium, that's to do with the smell sort of thing. So that's also quite, that's even more persistent than, it's not as 57%, and then it's still persistent pretty nearly 30%. So that's an interesting one that people have talked about. So we're still seeing some of these issues that people are having. So it's interesting to say the least. And yeah, so having more of those related aches and pains. It sort of varies. I mean, I do get people that tell me that they've had like persistent fatigue and stuff like that. But also quite a few people that have told me about aches and pains persisting. But you know, okay, they say it's less than even the smell stuff. So it's surprising because I get more people that tell me about aches and pains rather than smell. But anyway, remember, this is incomplete data. Remember, they did say it is incomplete. Headaches still persisting for a smaller percentage. Fever pretty much goes away once you post the disease, so to speak. Dyspnea, that's pretty high. It's about nearly 50%, comes down to 25%. It doesn't even halve. So that's difficulty breathing and stuff like that people have had. For some, I know a few people that have approached me with this condition. As I said to them, because they really didn't have any other symptoms, and I don't know whether this disease had anything to do with it or not. Sometimes you can get certain symptoms, but not others. It's really hard to basically determine these sort of things sometimes. Joint pain seems to just persist at the same levels, 35.7, 35.7. So these long sort of COVID conditions seem to cause joint pains, knees and elbows, I suspect, and they're covering all the sort of different joints, maybe back issues as well. Not sure how that's covered with the sort of this part, the aches and pains. But anyway, rhinorrhea, that's about half, so it's still quite high. That's sort of discharge from the nose. The fluids, I'm surprised. Yeah, it still persists, doesn't it? Quite a bit. I thought that like fever that would go away. I'm surprised. You're still having nasal sort of activity with your nose. Interesting. Chest pain still persists a bit, not a lot. Abdominal pain, so stomach and stuff like that. We know people are getting diarrhea, stomach cramps, and a few things when they do get the disease, even when they get jab of the hut, some of them as well. But it does go away in follow-up when they look, rather than being in the active phase of the actual disease. So that's quite interesting. We can see here taurine gets elevated from the normal range. Even on the follow-up, it's still quite high. Glucose, remember I was talking about last time about the Israeli studies looking at how the disease itself is interfering and actually increasing reactive oxygen species within the mitochondria to disrupt signaling between that and the nucleus of the cell. And so how that's affecting also, ribosomes, protein folding and stuff like that. So that's an interesting thing. That's, so I'm not surprised to see that sort of elevation of glucose, because we know it's sort of forcing the glycolytic pathways. This is an interesting way of actually showing, normally the sort of things that get interacted and sort of things like that, which I always find interesting and all that, So, and this sort of stuff, has to do with sort of muscle fatigue and whatever else. And as you can see, look at the jump. Look at the jump. And it still persists after. It's in this second tier with taurine and citrulline, where in the disease phase, citrulline is much lower. So it seems that the system is basically still got this low-grade inflammation, stuff like that. And it's actually trying to improve vasodilation, probably to heal and improve. And that's why it's persisting. It goes actually a bit higher at that phase, which is interesting. where the sort of fatigue thing drops back. It's still high as these other two parameters. You know, aspartic acid is related, and also because it also has some relationship with phenylalanine, which is also interesting to be associated with sort of neurotransmitters and stuff like that. So that doesn't surprise me that it's sort of in that area as well. So, but it's, you know, it's interesting in that regard. You know, so, and then I think that because that's related to tyrosine, and I think we did see did they have tyrosine here? Not sure. Anyway, but that's related to that. But it does still persist a bit, you know, but it's actually come down from the normal range, which is interesting. So that's sort of been affected as well. And we know that some of the brain chemistry, some people are getting all these things, insomnia, sleep issues, and all sorts of things. So, and the taurine requirements still remain elevated. The need for taurine is elevated because normally it's, you know, down here, but it's jumping dramatically. So the requirements of taurine, and I've been saying this for quite some time, that I, you know, regulating the immune system and taurine being required in greater amounts under these disease conditions for the immune system. So I'm not surprised to see it elevated, the requirements being elevated. So that hasn't, you could say, shocked me at all in that regard. I think if I'd seen something different, it probably would have shocked me. And that just shows relationships between the cohort, positive and follow-up, sort of the different parameters that are more pronounced and all that. Let's just go back here. I just wanted to take a look at this. You know, when we're looking at sort of dyspnea with difficulty breathing and stuff like that, I mean, there's lung, you know, general lung function, but it's, you know, I mean, we've got patients are actually being identified at very high amounts compared to a lot of the other sort of conditions, even cardiac stuff, you know, much lower numbers, even though we get a lot in the media about cardiac stuff, about people not having smell issues and stuff like that. But, so that's the, that one's the sort of, that's, I think that's when you don't have any ability. I think that's what they said. That's just give me a sec. I need to remind myself. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, because I remember reading the other part. That's the inability. That means to perceive stuff and all that. So I think that's just when it's, you know, partial, you know, when it's mild and stuff like that. But that's the actual one where you actually lose your sense of smell. You can't perceive smells and odors and whatever else. This one is when you've got that relates with the I think that relates with the hallucination. They just had one case study down here. I think that's when you can still smell, but you can't actually perceive things properly or something along those lines. You're eating a steak and you think you're eating a vegetable. Oh, well, that would be scary. Probably not for us, but it would be scary for the vegans the other way around. Just kidding. Okay, low potassium, interesting. So there have been identified people with low potassium. Obviously, we've got quite a few people with liver dysfunction. That doesn't surprise me, because remember when we were looking at the beginning of the stuff, they did talk about certain parameters that were actually indicating liver problems. Thyroid dysfunction as well. So the big one here is chronic fatigue. I mean, you can see again, look at these big numbers, like big cross-sectional studies with 150,000 people. So again, dyspnea, difficulty breathing, again, quite high. Those two groups seem to be very high chronic fatigue and dyspnea. And, you know, sleep difficulty as well is a big group. And all the other ones are pretty skin conditions and whatever else are much smaller. Reactive arthritis is small. Facial nerve palsy. So I think I've heard even some, I suspect there's actually been more people with sort of facial type impairments or whatever that have actually emerged with the jab of the Hutt more than the actual virus itself. So there's cognitive impairment as well. It's interesting, but it's not massive, you know, so we're not having an epidemic of morons. Well, unless you look at it, the political establishment and all that, yep, there's probably definitely an epidemic up there at the top of moronic thinking. But yeah, the two big ones that I've sort of noticed from even the cross studies is the chronic fatigue and the dyspnea, which does not surprise me, because that didn't come back down a lot. Didn't go too high, but didn't come down a lot. And the fatigue, you know, again, didn't come down a lot. But all these other things, you know, smell, again, coughing and muscle aches and pains, joint pains, these are still quite elevated, even post in that regard. So yeah, it's I'll pin this and people can go away and actually look at it in more detail. Obviously, this is incomplete in that regard, but it's the stuff that we've actually, that has been sort of put together up until this stage to give us an idea of, you know, where things are at in terms of the post effects and all that. But as I've said, guys, you've got to basically keep, you know, your taurine levels high, your vitamin D levels to regulate your immune system. You want to be getting negatives so you don't get the actual C19 and all these after effects. I've been exposed heavily by somebody that was positive and had actual lung issues and was sleeping with my brother. Basically, he actually had 5 negatives. Again, doing my protocol, taurine, vitamin D, and he was doing also zinc. I don't do zinc because I eat plenty of meat, far more than he does. And so he was on a zinc supplement. I didn't have to be. If I was eating less meat for whatever reason, then I'd be on a zinc supplement as well. But I don't think carnivores need to be on a zinc supplement. We get more than enough from our diet, heaps. So, but it can be an issue for people that are not getting enough in that regard, or eating plants that inhibit exactly for those purposes. I do encourage people who are munchers of vegetation to take a supplement. But for everyone else that is a carny, just eat your meat, get your taurine in, and make sure your levels of vitamin D are in the higher levels, because that's going to regulate your immune system in very well and clear out both the jabbering stuff, the virus itself. Good T lymphocytes, always going to do a very better job than basically meds. Just remember that. Post this sort of stuff, there's a lot of suffering and time, and that is required to get back to where you were. Best way is to avoid the disease getting a foothold in your system by those T lymphocytes blasting it out of, going to war, the Dalek T lymphocytes annihilating. Yes, you need your T lymphocytes to be on the front line going, we will exterminate you, C19. Yes, exactly. That's what we want. Anyway, beside the comedy, that's the sort of the state of affairs in terms of the big ailments and all that. So go through them. If you've got family members or whatever that have got certain ailments and stuff like that, go through and look at those sort of things, identify those sort of conditions. If you want more info specifically for one of those things, just leave a comment and I'll give you a general outline. Ultimately, the best way to clear out something out of your system and to improve the functioning of your body and the reparative state of your body is to improve your immune system. Taurine, which is basically, when I say taurine, I mean seafood and meat. That's what I mean. So basically taurine, the sun, and you're going to have a far stronger, more robust immune system to deal with these issues compared to others. And hopefully, if you're going to be an example, you'd encourage other members of your family to consider a species-appropriate diet and the sun. Anyway, thanks and see yous.